The waitress stood frozen in the middle of the crowded diner, the noise of New Year's Eve crashing around her like waves, when the words slipped from her mouth before she could stop them. "I need a husband by tomorrow." For a heartbeat, even the jukebox seemed to hesitate. Laughter followed, sharp and careless, customers thinking it was a joke, a desperate line meant to entertain. But her eyes were shiny, her hands trembling as she gripped the order pad. If you've ever felt trapped by time, by expectations, by a single moment that could change everything, stay with this story until the very end. And if stories like this move your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, you'll be glad you did. Maya had been on her feet since dawn, pouring coffee for couples holding hands, families counting down the hours to fireworks, and lonely souls pretending they didn't mind being alone. New Year's Eve was always hard, but this one felt cruel. By midnight, if she didn't have a husband, or at least proof of one, she would lose the tiny apartment she shared with her younger brother. Her landlord was old-fashioned and relentless, convinced that an unmarried woman couldn't handle responsibility. It was unfair, outdated, and humiliating, but Maya had already fought and lost that battle. Her brother was sick, medical bills were stacking up, and she couldn't afford to move. So she kept smiling, even as her chest tightened with every passing hour. At the counter sat Daniel, a single dad who came to the diner every Friday night with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Tonight was an exception. New Year's Eve was Lily's favorite, full of sparkly hats and noisy horns. Daniel wore a worn jacket and the tired look of a man who had learned how to survive without complaint. 2 years earlier, he had buried his wife after a long illness, and since then his world revolved around his daughter and keeping their small life steady. He worked construction during the day, fixed things for neighbors at night, and measured his success by Lily's laughter. Lily noticed Maya's shaking hands before anyone else. Kids always saw what adults missed. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging his sleeve, "the lady is sad." Daniel followed her gaze and saw Maya wiping her eyes when she thought no one was looking. He'd seen that look before, in mirrors, in late-night reflections when the house was too quiet. When Maya blurted out her desperate sentence, something in his chest shifted. Maya fled to the back room, mortified. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal locker, counting her breaths. She felt foolish for saying it out loud, for letting the world see how trapped she was. She imagined midnight striking, the landlord's knock, her brother's pale face, and the long walk into uncertainty. She wiped her tears, rehearsing how she'd finish the shift with dignity. When she stepped back out, Daniel was standing by the counter. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, expecting mockery or pity. Instead, he offered a gentle smile. "You don't have to explain," he said. "But if you want to talk, I'm listening." Something about his voice, steady, unjudging, broke the dam. Maya found herself telling him everything in rushed whispers. The landlord, her brother, the deadline, the fear of starting a new year with nothing. Daniel listened without interrupting, Lily quietly coloring beside him, occasionally glancing up with solemn eyes. "I know this sounds crazy," Maya finished, her cheeks burning. "But if I don't solve this by tomorrow, I don't know what we'll do." Daniel hesitated, his mind racing. He thought of his own struggles, of nights when he'd wished for help but didn't know how to ask. He thought of Lily, who believed adults should help each other because that's how families work. Lily looked up at him then and said, matter-of-factly, "Daddy, you could help her." Maya laughed weakly. "I don't think anyone can help me now." Daniel took a breath. "What if someone could?" he asked. "What if, just for a little while?" She stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said carefully, "what if I stood up with you? What if, for tonight, you weren't alone?" The idea was absurd, dangerous. And yet, for the first time that night, hope flickered. They talked through it slowly, cautiously. A simple plan. No lies beyond what was necessary. No expectations beyond kindness. By the time midnight approached, Maya felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified and exhilarated. When the countdown began, the diner erupted. 10, 9, 8. Daniel stood beside Maya as the landlord, who had come for his usual New Year's coffee, looked on skeptically. At 0, fireworks boomed outside, and Daniel gently placed his hand over Maya's. "Happy New Year," he said, loud enough for the landlord to hear. "I'm her husband." The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. The landlord's eyebrows rose, his skepticism softening into reluctant acceptance. He muttered something about congratulations and shuffled back to his booth. Maya's knees nearly buckled with relief. She laughed and cried at the same time, gripping Daniel's hand like a lifeline. But the story didn't end at midnight. Because real life is messier than a single moment of courage. Over the next weeks, Daniel and Maya navigated the strange space between pretending and truth. They set boundaries, supported each other, shared dinners and stories. Lily adored Maya, slipping her hand into hers as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Maya helped Lily with homework, Daniel fixed the leaky sink in Maya's apartment. What started as an act of desperation grew into something warm and steady. There were challenges, whispers from neighbors, awkward questions, moments when grief and fear resurfaced. Daniel struggled with guilt, wondering if he was betraying his late wife by moving forward. Maya battled insecurity, afraid the kindness would vanish once the need passed. They talked through it all, honestly, learning that love doesn't erase pain, it sits beside it and makes room. One evening, months later, Maya's brother came home from the hospital, stronger and smiling. They celebrated with takeout and laughter, Lily insisting on a toast with apple juice. Maya looked around the table, at the mismatched plates and shared smiles, and realized something had changed. She hadn't just found a solution, she'd found a family. On the anniversary of that New Year's Eve, Daniel took Maya back to the diner. The same booth, the same jukebox. This time, there was no pretense. He reached across the table, his voice steady but his eyes nervous. Last year, I stood up because you needed someone, he said. This year, I'm standing because I want to. Will you really be my wife?